Well, today, this is a pleasure to get to introduce to you a guy who has done a lot in his life, more than most of us will ever do. This is Frank Blake. Frank was the CEO of the Home Depot. Most of you have probably worn the orange apron, maybe when you were a kid. I know my kids do. But Frank, thanks for being a part of this.
Yeah.
We just want to ask you some questions about how you got to where you are. Your career has had a path, and you've made some good decisions, made some not so good decisions, but you're a fantastic man and a Buckhead Church attendee, which is phenomenal.
Yep.
So your career, can you give us just a little snapshot?
So the snapshot is I'm a lawyer by training.
Went to Harvard as an
I
undergrad.
went to Harvard as an undergrad, Columbia Law School. After Columbia Law School, I clerked for a judge, then a justice for the Supreme Court.
Wow.
Stayed in Washington, D.C., had a very typical kind of Washington, D.C. career. Worked for George Bush dad when he was vice president, then for George Bush son when he was president. Left Washington, D.C. after a while and went to work at GE as a lawyer and moved from the legal side to the business side, ended up running all of M&A for mergers and acquisitions for GE.
Yep.
Then came to Home Depot to do the same thing. And
Store manager?
No, yeah. And then ended up as the CEO of Home Depot in 2007.
Which is, I would imagine, has a lot of perks. Just since these are students, give them one of the most entertaining perks that comes with being the CEO of Home Depot.
Well, I don't know if it's entertaining, but clearly the one that's the best is the company plane. So the company plane is
The jet?
The jet.
How many seats?
So Home Depot has a fleet because we have over 2,000.
Oh, it's not one jet.
Oh no, we have multiple jets, and we have over 2,000 stores, and we fly around and visit the stores a lot. But having your own plane is it's not my plane, but it was my plane when I was
had
there,
access to it.
and it's a great thing.
That's
'cause
phenomenal.
It's hard to imagine life when you're not going through the TSA lines and you're not queuing up to get on board. You just arrive, they take your bags, you're on the plane,
Wow.
and then you land someplace. Yeah,
Wow.
That's very cool.
So, Frank, when we thought about having the opportunity to sit down with you, one of the things that we thought would be interesting to high school students is you're 68 years old. This summer you said you'll have your 50th
high school
reunion.
Yeah, terrifying.
So the people that speak to our high school students are typically a little bit younger, but you have way more to say than any speaker we've ever had. So can you think back to when you're 18? Let's just start with the advice that you would give your 18-year-old self.
The advice I give to my 18, and this is probably advice that everybody gets all the time as an 18-year-old and is probably useless, but I'll say it anyways. The advice is don't stress. You think you're in charge, you think you're planning, you think you're controlling things, and you're not. And so don't stress so much. You've got life is an incredible blessing, and enjoy it.
So I'm glad you say that, because students, particularly when you're a senior in high school, it feels like the weight of the world is on your shoulders. I mean, you've got your parents asking you about your college applications. You're trying to close out high school and not have to retake high school. You've got sports, you've got activities, clubs. On top of that, there's just pressure that happens socially of having to keep up. Is it really possible, do you think, for a student to just relax and say, I'm not going to take this so seriously?
Probably not. It's probably not possible, but it's worthwhile understanding that a lot of the things that you freight with enormous significance aren't.
Yeah.
And when you look back, you're going to look back and you're going to see so many vectors off that were impacted by sheer coincidence, by choices you didn't even realize you were making.
And you mean like a career change?
Complete career change.
That you would have never drawn up.
Never drawn up.
Yeah.
Or things that, again, people say this, it's a cliche, but it looks like it's a horrible thing that's happened to you, and it actually turns out to be a great opportunity. One of the great things about being at Home Depot and sort of internalize the, hey, take a deep breath, is Home Depot is one of the most successful retail concepts in the history of the world. It was founded by two people who were fired from their job. So Bernie Marcus and Arthur Blank were fired.
Which you would have thought in their mind the world was over.
And they will say it.
Wow.
They will say it.
Wow.
They thought the world was
Wow.
over.
Wow.
And they actually, Ken Langone, the third founder, came to them and said, this is the greatest thing that you've been fired. This is so exciting.
Wow.
And they're going, you're
Wow.
nuts.
Wow.
And it turned out exactly the case.
So I think the wisdom in that is massive for a student to be able to recognize that and go, even the stuff that happens for bad, God can turn around and
Right.
use it for good.
Right.
And I know a lot, if I were 18, I would be looking at you going, well, that's easy for you to say,
Easy,
Frank.
exactly.
You were the CEO
Exactly.
of Home Depot, you're
Yeah.
whisked around on
Yeah.
jets. But you would say that's true, I think,
Yep.
just knowing you whether
Yep.
you were the CEO of Home Depot or
Absolutely.
not. Is that true?
Absolutely right. Absolutely.
So-
And plus, as we all know, it's not like by worrying, we
You're
had
going to add anything. I think someone
right?
very
Someone very
brilliant
profound
said
said
Yeah,
that.
Jesus
So-
said,
so-
how much could you add to your
Right.
life?
Right.
The answer is nothing.
Right.
So that's great. That's great advice. What about we have a lot of students that they're young and they're entrepreneurial and they're already thinking about business and they do want to take steps though to move forward with a business career. Any advice you'd give to them about what they could do now?
One of the things that's really exciting, and I'm involved in some of them here in town in Atlanta, is there is more scope now at a younger age to kind of step out and take some risks with startup ideas than ever existed before. And I'd say I'd encourage people to go take some risks, and they can you can put boundaries around it in terms of professionally, but you learn again, deep cliche but deeply true. You learn so much from just making the effort, whether the effort succeeds or not. No, I mean, it's not that you learn from failure. I think that's a mistaken cliche because no one wants to fail,
Right.
so you don't say,
You don't do it on
"Gee, this
purpose."
is right."
Yeah.
But you learn from making the effort, and it's worth thinking of the areas where you're willing to make that kind of effort because you're going to learn from it.
So can they go to their parents and say, my surrogate grandfather, Frank Blank, said that I don't need to go to college next year. I can take a risk and start something?
I would definitely not do that. And the reason not to do that is that I think careers are a series of building competencies. That's what you're doing in a career. You're building up different competencies to handle bigger and bigger problems. College is a pretty basic competency.
Wow.
There are some people who can do without it
Yeah.
because they're just, they're the
Mark
Mark
Zuckerbergs of the world,
Zuckerbergs,
right.
exactly, of the world who are just so
Right.
brilliant, they
Right.
don't need that competency. For the rest of us, we actually need that competency.
So take risks in the confines of
Right.
getting an education.
Understand
Yeah.
that you need to be building competencies and, open up your aperture for doing other things, but still get the basics done.
So let me ask you a question, Frank, about being a servant to other people. You have a very humble way. You seemed, even as a CEO, you were so interested in the complaints of customers and listening to customers, and you seemed like you served the people you were around. Jesus says in Mark 10, he says, don't be like the rulers that lord their authority over others, but serve. Go and, in fact, he says, even the Son of Man gave his life as a ransom for many. Did you learn to do that early on in life? Was that something that was a learned habit for you? At what point did you decide to say, I'm going to start trying to help other people?
The honest answer is no, I didn't learn that early in life.
That's good.
And that as you go forward in life, what you find is that serving others is a great way to learn. So
To learn what they might know.
learn what they might know. You're always going to be in some position where maybe those others that you're serving are your customers, maybe those others
At a
you're
restaurant,
serving
sure.
are colleagues. But the process of doing that, that is the best
Wow.
just
Wow.
practical way of learning,
Yeah.
because you don't learn much
Yeah.
when you're just telling somebody, hey, go do this, go
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
The only way you learn is actually saying, hey, I'm here to help you solve your
Yeah.
problem.
So
And
even as a
genuinely.
clerk in a
Right.
in a courtroom,
Right.
even as a lower level person in a business, by serving, you're picking
Right,
things up.
you're picking,
learning.
exactly. It's the best, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure this wasn't what he meant.
what Jesus meant,
It's
exactly.
not what he meant.
Right.
But it's an interesting practical value
Yeah.
that you get. There's a great, and this applies later in careers, but there's a great phrase, I think it's a John Maxwell phrase, that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Right.
So you start,
Yep.
your first base is,
Yep.
hey, I care
Yeah.
about helping wherever you are and helping you achieve your
Yeah.
goals.
Well, I know you're joking that Jesus didn't mean that, and I don't know whether he did or
Right.
didn't, but I do know that it works out for our
Right.
good when we
Right.
do. I
Exactly.
think when
That's
we
the
look-
profound part of it.
That's right.
That's the
That
profound
when
part
you
of it.
give your life away, you actually
Right.
find it, is
Yep.
what he also said.
Yep.
So, any, if you could just, as we conclude, think about these students as you've got grandkids that are a little bit younger, but for a lot of these students, they might have a dad that's not as present. They might not have, I never knew grandparents for me. So could you just speak for a moment to close us out of what would you say, other than not stressing, which is really important
Yeah.
because you were an attorney
Yep.
and then you ended up running a business. You couldn't have planned that.
Nope.
But what are some things that they should be thinking about, processing, doing? What's most important for them right now?
So the other thing that I would say that is surprisingly powerful as a thought process is saying thank you. And it is surprisingly powerful. I can tell you that, and particularly true actually for young people, when they take the time to say thank you for people who've done things for them, it's an amazingly powerful thing to do.
Wow.
And so take the time to do that, make a habit of doing that. It's one of the things, you mentioned, I mentioned the number of the people that I worked for in life. Very, very early in my career, I worked for George Bush Dad when he was vice president. And one of the things that he did every day as a matter of discipline, now he obviously knew thousands and thousands of people.
Sure.
Every day, he took time to write thank you notes
Wow.
to people.
Wow.
And don't have that thousands and thousands of people, but if you had the discipline on a weekly basis to say, are there people I should just say thank you to?
Wow.
Send a text, hey, thanks for doing
Yeah.
this. It's amazing how powerful that is.
Well, and I think the wisdom of that is that it's hard to be grateful and be unhappy. And so
Right.
at 68, I think
Right.
that's tremendous advice to give to a bunch of 18-year-olds
Yeah.
to say, hey, you want to find joy in life, and the quickest way to find joy is to be grateful. So
Yep.
that's
Good way to
brilliant.
express it.
So thank you. Well, thank you so much
Yep.
for doing
Thank
this.
you, Clay.
It's a pleasure.
It's a treat.
And